Okay, so welcome back for our final panel. We're going to be talking about executing the Office of the Attorney General. My name is Erika, and I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the office, and it's my honor to be here and part of this discussion today. Now, the gentlemen next to me, I think, need no introduction, but I can't resist in at least giving one fun fact about each of them. So I will start to my immediate left, and before I give Senator Gorton's fun fact, I do have to thank John Hughes for giving me the fact and then divulging it during his presentation, but I do have some. So as you heard in the first discussion, in Senator Gorton's first term, him and his family biked across country from Washington State to Massachusetts, but what you didn't hear is that it to me, only took 45 days, which I find amazing, and that they spent their evenings staying in church basements or in the houses of people that they met along the way. And that, in fact, his youngest daughter, who at the time was 11, for a period of time was in the Guinness Book of World Records as the youngest person to ride across America.
That's pretty good.
Pretty amazing. Gives my son something to aspire to. Next to Senator Gorton, of course, is Rob McKenna, and Rob became a fan of karaoke while spending a year in Japan as an aide with the chief cabinet secretary under Prime Minister Miyazawa, and I can't resist but ask, did you have a go-to song?
Absolutely, you have to have a go-to song. It's one of the first things you learn. It was California Dreaming.
Very
All
good.
the leaves are brown.
That's for after
Oh,
the
sorry.
Symposium.
Join us at the reception, ladies and gentlemen.
And last but not least, Bob Ferguson, with all of his great work, you will learn today, has a dark spot, and that is he was rejected by the University of Washington Law School.
True. It's true. I still have the rejection letter.
We actually brought the person. No,
Right.
just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think things turned out okay. So we are going to go ahead and jump in to talk about executing the work of the Attorney General. And I think what's interesting about it is, of course, as Attorney General, there are so many decisions that you have to make, whether it's about a case or bringing a case, affirmative, your initiatives. And I'm curious from all three of you during your time as AG, what was your most difficult decision? Could have been.
Rob, do you want to go first? You jump in.
Sure. Yeah, this is an easy one. My most difficult decision was resulted in me being sued by one of my clients and ending up in the state Supreme Court and losing, which was when we decided not to represent the Commissioner of Public Lands in a case which we had represented him in trial court concerning the authority of the Public Utility District in Okanagan County to condemn an easement across land owned by the state for a power line which the commissioner personally opposed. We said it's a loser of a case. You're on the wrong side of the law. We have a duty to the court to be honest that there really isn't a good case here. And so he filed a lawsuit against me to force me to provide a lawyer for him. And the Supreme Court sided with him based on part of one sentence in the authorizing statute for the Commissioner of Public Lands. So that wasn't the most fun I'd ever had. And of course, he went on to lose 3-0 in the Court of Appeals and 9-0 in the state Supreme Court, because indeed the law was not on his side. But the Supreme Court, head of that, thought it was very important that he have a lawyer in this case. So that unfortunately created a little bit of a precedent. Now we have Superior Court judges and others going to the Attorney General's office demanding that they be assigned an Assistant Attorney General or Special Assistant Attorney General when they want to sue. But that was the toughest one. But I have to say, my Chief Deputy Attorney General at the time, who succeeded Mr. Wright there, who was my first Chief Deputy Attorney General, and my Solicitor General and the Deputy Attorney General, everyone involved said we should not agree to do this. We should not agree to represent him. We have a larger duty here. We don't represent an individual. We don't even represent the agency so much as we represent the state's interest. And we thought it was wrong to file an appeal in a case where the law was so clearly in the opposite direction of the client's desire. So,
Well, I'll answer the question a little bit differently. It would be my most panicked decision.
That should be good.
During my first 2 terms as Attorney General, Dan Evans was governor. We were close friends, and it was a close personal relationship. He was succeeded by Dixie Lee Ray. Dixie Lee Ray intensely disliked lawyers, Republicans, and friends of Dan Evans. And I qualified on all 3 counts. And one of the first bills she had introduced in the legislature was to remove from the Attorney General's jurisdiction all Assistant Attorneys General who represented agencies of the state and have them subject to the governor's authority. In other words, probably cutting 3/4 or 80% of the work of the Attorney General away from the Attorney General itself. I'll tell you, I panicked. There were Democratic majorities in both houses of the legislature at that point, and this was a major threat, and even looking at it objectively would have been a terrible policy decision to make. Fortunately, a number of years of being quite willing to listen to people from the other side, and in my first 2 terms conducting the Attorney General's office in a relatively nonpartisan fashion, I was able to go to the father of the now mayor of Seattle, Senator Martin Durkin, with whom I had created a great relationship and who was a major factor in the United States Senate. And my panic lasted about 5 minutes. He said, "Don't worry, Slade, I'll take care of it," and he did.
Wow. Wow.
I guess, Eric, I'd say, my twins are now almost 10, and when they were young, when I first started the job, they would sometimes ask what my job was, and I often would describe it to them as saying, well, Daddy makes a lot of decisions. My job is make lots of decisions, and that's a big part of the job, as you know. Most difficult, I think, it's hard to pick one, but for me, I think the one I wrestled with the most, I think it's fair to say, is there was an officer-involved shooting in the Tri-Cities. An individual was shot and killed by police officers. A tragic situation all the way around. The local prosecutor declined to press charges against the law enforcement officials. The governor asked me to review that decision. It's difficult for a lot of obvious reasons. I think part of it also was that I don't have a criminal law background, and so this was a circumstance that I did not have a particular background. I'm a litigator on civil law, and so I think that combined with the stakes of what's involved, a life was lost, reputations of officers, learning a new area of the law. I spent a lot more time on that. I think I can usually make decisions pretty quickly to keep things moving. That one, I took months. I just really, really wrestled with it. There was a lot of stuff to review, a lot of videos, and that was a tough one. Yeah.
And then let's stay with you, Bob, for a moment, and sort of piggybacking on that. Making decisions in the office, some of those you sort of anticipate might be controversial. Mm-hmm. And some, I'm guessing you guess, nobody's going to care about, and then
Yeah.
It turns out not that way. What has so far for you has turned out to be the most controversial decision, and did you expect it at the time that you made it?
Most controversial, I think is fair to say, is the first lawsuit against the Trump administration on the travel ban. That was the first lawsuit brought by any attorney general against the Trump administration. Now there are many, dozens of them, right? But at that time, keep in mind, it was new in the administration. No one had sued him. The travel ban is executed. And I remember talking to Noah Purcell, my Solicitor General, who you just heard from the day after the travel ban was executed. We were having a conversation about whether or not to file a lawsuit. And we knew it was a big decision and an important one, and there'd be strong feelings about it, but I think we would both agree that we would just completely underestimated just how big a case that was going to become and how strongly people would feel about it on whatever side of the issue they viewed it. So again, we knew it was big, but my God, it just became such a much larger issue than we frankly could have possibly have contemplated. And so I'd say that's the one that's relatively easy from my standpoint to say, yeah.
How about you, Rob?
Well, most people would say that the most controversial decision was to challenge the Affordable Care Act, and they would be right. We started out, there were just 3 state AGs who were very concerned about the provisions of the act, specific provisions, particularly regarding what the feds were threatening to do to the states over Medicaid and the individual health care mandate. Then there were 10 AGs, and then there were 27 or 28 AGs ultimately who joined that challenge. It generated, I can't remember the exact number, but I'll bet our receptionist remembers the exact number. Something like 10 or 15,000 calls to the office in favor of the decision and a roughly equal number opposed to it. And it really tested the idea that the office has a responsibility to stand up to the federal government when we think the federal government's wrong about something and when the rights of the state are at issue. So that was a very, very hot issue. But we were originally criticized for filing a frivolous lawsuit, including by at least one person here at the law school at the time. But as we started to win, we didn't hear as much about that, and of course went to the Supreme Court, and we won on the Medicaid issue, and then lost on the issue of whether the health mandate was unconstitutional or not, and that interesting decision where the Chief Justice found a way to uphold it, but that clearly was the most controversial case.
Senator.
It was to sue my predecessor. John O'Connell had hired outside attorneys in San Francisco to pursue an antitrust case against certain drug companies, and had made a private arrangement with that lawyer to rebate some of the fees to him for supposed work that he did on the case privately. It was stunning to discover it. It was a difficult decision to deal with the people who worked for me. 3 of my 4 deputy attorneys general had worked for him, and of course it was across partisan lines. It didn't even turn out well. We ended up trying it in Vancouver in Clark County with a very good outside lawyer representing the state, and we lost. It's still an incredible decision to me. It, I guess, shows the differences between attitudes toward public servants in 1969 and 2018. Today, it would be a slam dunk.
I believe that the legislature changed the law, just for the record, so attorneys general cannot personally profit from any cases. I just want to make sure everybody's hearing that. I just want to make sure, yeah. But because of that case, there was a change in state law, so yeah.
Not only that, but the oath that the Attorney General takes, the oath of office, is different than the oath of office that any other state officer takes.
It's got that strange line in
it
there.
has this line in it that refers to a section of the RCW, which is the one Bob's referring to, which basically says, and we promise not to represent anyone else or do any other legal work other than for the state.
Well, it's interesting, all 3 of you mentioned cases with political implications, and I wonder if your thought process in deciding whether to bring those cases, whether that changed when there was political implications versus when there isn't. Can you talk through that?
It just made them tougher. It was just, a consideration you wish you didn't have to have.
I would agree with that. It's, I think earlier the previous group talked about the Colfort's case. The Supreme Court's taken the Colfort's case on review. Look, it's no secret that my decision to appeal that case to the Supreme Court has angered tribes across the state, to put it very mildly. And these are folks I know well. I know them personally. They are friends and colleagues. I know them well. And on the general issue of the environment and protection of our salmon, I have strong views in support of that. But, sometimes one's duty as Attorney General, and that was a discretionary decision, right, whether to appeal or not. I don't have to do it. That's discretionary. But I guess the part that bothers me is you just start getting so many phone calls from your friends out there say, Bob, what are you doing? Don't you understand the politics of this? And my response to them, like, I'm not that dumb. Yes, I got it. I got it, really. But, make a legal argument with me. Make a legal argument. Make an argument about my duty. I'll listen to that, but I understand the politics. I got that part covered. I really do, right? So you consider that after hours, right? And you handle that in a way that's appropriate, right, on the political side. But as I mentioned upstairs with the students we were speaking with Senator Gorton, is I have a strong view that I suspect each of these gentlemen agree with, that if your team senses any daylight between what is doing the right thing for the office and the people and the politically expedient thing, you're never getting their respect back. You just won't. I mean, once you make that decision yourself, what's going to stop you the next time from making the easier decision or the one after that? It has to be a bright line, I think. And I think that's why the AG's office in Washington State has such a great reputation nationwide over so many decades, is I think, my predecessors have really stuck to that. Whether individuals in the state agree with them personally or not on their decisions, I think it came from a place of trying to represent the state in an independent fashion.
I know a lot about that case, of course, because I inherited it from Chris Gregoire and I handed it off to Bob.
Thanks. Yeah.
Since it wasn't our fault, we were still waiting for a decision from the district court when I left office. It was a very long wait. But I think this is, first of all, this case could take an entire seminar in and of itself.
Yes.
It's very interesting. But I think it's very important to recognize that sometimes the Attorney General and the Attorney General's office it needs to be in the position of asking the courts to make the final decision and not effectively making the decision themselves by choosing a certain path. If you choose not to appeal, then you're effectively saying, we're going to live with this, instead of saying, this is so important that it's appropriate for the judiciary to decide. That's the way I felt about the individual health care mandate, for example. It's not wrong for us to raise the issues and let the courts decide. That's what they're there for. But we have clients. So I think that that's the first point I want to make. The second point is that we do have pressures on us as elected officials when we're AG, and there's that just comes with the fact the voters decided a long time ago, or the framers of the Constitution decided it should be an elected office. 43 AGs are elected and 7 are appointed. But if you think that the 7 who are appointed don't face similar kinds of pressures and decisions, you would be mistaken, because of course they are appointed typically by the governor. So they have to think, well, how is this going to affect the guy who appointed me, or the woman who appointed me, the Madam Governor. So you don't escape it no matter what, because you're part of the government, and as part of the government, you are accountable to the people one way or the other.
Senator.
Probably the one that created the most controversy, of course, was a decision that I made as an individual rather than the lead of the Attorney General's office with respect to President Nixon. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That created a hell of a controversy.
And one thing I'm curious about, sir, but the decision to call for Nixon's resignation, the first Washingtonian of real prominence to do that. How did you deal with the political side of that? We talked about how the Pierce County Republicans censured you in some way. Like, how did you? I guess did you do anything proactively after that decision came out or before announcing it to try to address that politically?
I didn't do anything proactively on it.
You just did it.
I just did it and just made the speech, and I dealt with it thereafter because I think most of the newspapers and news organizations in the state tended to agree with me, and I got favorable response from them. The negative response I got was from Republican activists. And my view, and I think Rob's view, and perhaps yours, is that proper Republican policy is what we think it ought to be, and therefore was willing to defend it. Now that one had a definite life term. Mm-hmm. 6 months later, he was out of office, and at that point, I was a genius, mm-hmm. and everyone figured that I had some inside information at the time, which I did not. So it turned out right, but certainly at the time, and I knew it wasn't one that was a surprise. I knew that it was going to be controversial when I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in the discussion with John Hughes, he talked about our political climate right now and how polarized it is. And I wanted to ask each of you how important you think today the role of the state attorney general is in this political climate. Has it changed since, do you think, Senator Gorton?
Well, I think all three of us agree that the role of the attorney general is a very important one, and that it is unique among elected officers. Although we don't see that in the last couple of national administrations, it's unique at the level of the Attorney General of the United States too, who, while he's appointed by the president and serves at his pleasure, nonetheless is the enforcer of the law and is sworn to do it objectively and without political motivation to the maximum possible extent. And that's one of the, I think, one of the elements that unites the three of us. It's a wonderful position because in connection with many controversies, you're above the ground. It isn't, they aren't partisan political decisions that you make. And as long as you can, and Bob has put this very well, as long as you can justify them in your own mind, you're in fine shape.
How do you see it, Bob? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess I think it's changed significantly in a couple ways, but in terms of the national scope and reach of decisions that AGs make, it's been well documented in recent years. National health care, right? Yes, that's Congress acts, but it's AGs who brought that case all the way to the Supreme Court and that ultimately that 5-4 decision. And I think even in the last 8 to 10 years of the growth of litigation under the Obama administration from Republican AGs, and now even more litigation from Democratic AGs against the Trump administration, that is a big change. There's always been some litigation, right? I had a couple lawsuits against the Obama administration in my first term, but not to the same degree and not in past decades, I suspect as well. And that gets an awful lot of attention, as it should, from the public. Those lawsuits are high profile and important and touch on huge issues, travel bans, national health care, you name it. So I think my sense is, I'd be curious if Senator Gorton agrees, that my sense is there's a lot of focus on the Officer in General right now and in recent years. I'd be curious if you think, Senator, it's the same now as it was back when you were Attorney General, if it's heightened or about the same or anything else.
When I was Attorney General, we didn't have separate caucuses among the state attorneys general by party. And so for almost every major challenge that crossed state lines, it was for volunteers, across party lines, and you joined or not on the basis of your own view of the merits. And most of the collective actions, almost all of them, were bipartisan in nature.
Did you or your colleagues ever file a lawsuit against the then current presidential administration?
I believe, we must have, but I can't give you the example.
The most prominent example shortly before I became Attorney General was the Massachusetts VEPA case that a lot of you are familiar with. It was brought by 5 Democratic AGs to challenge the EPA's decision not to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. That resulted in a 5-4 Supreme Court decision agreeing with the AGs that the Clean Air Act does cover greenhouse gases. That was significant. Then during the Obama administration, one of my colleagues, Attorney General Greg Abbott of Texas, now the governor of Texas, bragged that he would get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to work, and sue Obama.
That's right.
I have it on good authority that Bob waits until lunch. But I don't want us to lose sight of the other ways in which the AGs are really important. I mean, we're talking about these suits with whoever the administration is. That's an important aspect of federalism, in my opinion. But beyond that, we still see, even with partisan caucuses, RAGA, DAGA, we still see a great deal of collaboration among the AGs without regard to party on consumer protection issues, antitrust, and other issues through what are called multi-states. Multi-state cases, multi-state investigations. And John Hughes may have already covered this, but, if you look at the photograph of everyone gathered for the very first meeting of the National Association of Attorneys General in 1906, it was in a ballroom in St. Louis, Missouri, and the purpose of the gathering was to talk about the state AGs cooperating and going after the Standard Oil Trust.
Interesting.
That's what brought the association together. And there have been leaps forward since then. Another important milestone was when the states adopted statutes prohibiting unfair or deceptive acts or practices by businesses, the consumer protection laws, and Slade forming the first consumer protection unit in Washington state history, probably one of the earlier ones in the country, although I don't know that for sure, Slade, if you guys were out in front. But that was a big step forward.
Yes.
And and then you had a leap forward in a sense with Massachusetts VPA and then so on. So the fact is that the AGs are busier than ever and more active than ever. And I agree with Bob; they have a higher profile than ever, particularly because of the suits. against the administration, but not only because of that. I mean, after all, the tobacco litigation was very high profile, and the AGs, including Chris Gregoire, who was a leader in that, found a way to get at the tobacco companies that private plaintiffs had never achieved. And it had huge ramifications, particularly in terms of helping to reduce the rate of smoking, particularly among young people in this country, which will literally save thousands and thousands of lives.
And there's something you said, Rob, about expansion of the consumer protection under Senator Gorton, and I couldn't resist but asking, I know Senator Gorton, while you were Attorney General, the office grew, almost doubled attorneys in the office, and you started the ecology division, and I was just curious, was there something that spurred that growth?
Part of it was picking the right people. You know, when I was elected, my first Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection and Antitrust was Chris Bailey, who had that idea in mind as a part of our picking him in the first place, that he wanted to raise the profile of consumer protection. And I now remember, this is a senior moment. Senior moment. I remembered what I was going to say about a failed campaign. And that is, when I became Attorney General, the Seattle tolerance policy was still in effect. The state constitution prohibited lotteries, basically prohibited commercialized gambling. Yet it went on here in the city of Seattle and across the state to a very considerable degree. I was then, and I am today, someone who believes that that professional and organized gambling is socially undesirable and has almost entirely negative effects on the population. And in one sense, I've been against it during my entire career, and I've never won a battle. Except maybe the first one. You know, I ginned up a request for an Attorney General's opinion on the validity of what was going on here in the state, and we opined quite correctly that it was invalid and illegal. And it led to one of the earlier reforms of the Seattle Police Department, and led to some profound changes because, among other things, it closed down church bingo. And that was, to use a World War II expression, a bridge too far.
You're least popular.
And the state constitution got amended, and we are where we are today. And unfortunately, I'm one of the causes of it.
Someone did a study, and I can't remember now if it was when I was in office or I just saw the study after I came into office, but it might have actually been done as far back as the Eikenberry years, but basically showed a strong correlation between the size of the Attorney General's office and the size of state government. It tracked almost perfectly. That the bigger state government got, the bigger the office got. That kind of follows, right? Because when you create, for example, a Department of Early Childhood Learning, you're going to need people to staff that. And because Washington State is a bit unique in the fact that the assistant attorneys general are part of our office. They're not in-house. The lawyers and the agencies aren't allowed to go to court. They don't even have the attorney-client privilege with their clients. You can see that kind of straight-line growth of government and the AG's office.
In fact, I believe we're the 5th largest AG's office in the country, put that in some perspective.
And have been for a while.
And have been for a while.
Yeah.
Well, when we were upstairs earlier with the lunch with the students, one of the students asked a question that I wanted to bring down here because I thought it was a great question. And that is that as Attorney General, you represent the legal interests of the whole state. But of course, when you make a decision or you bring a case, there are people on both sides of the issue, some who think when you bring the case it's going to be harmful, some who support that decision. And I wonder, as Attorney General, how you reconcile that. Does it matter? How does it matter?
Well, it depends. It highly depends on the issue. There are some decisions that you make that have such wide impact that you really want to consult fairly broadly before you decide to go ahead. None of us is omniscient by any stretch of the imagination, and we can't anticipate all of the consequences of the decisions we make. But others like mine, I guess mine on gambling, just come from your own character and your own approach, and you're willing to decide to take them on if you feel it's the right thing to do, and deal with the consequences and do your best to justify them. And if you can't justify them to yourself, you're not going to be able to justify them to others. So some of them die of mourning. But one of the great advantages of the Attorney General's office is when you decide something ought to happen, you can make it happen.
Agreed. Can't put it better than that.
The only thing I would add is sometimes something that can be a challenge sometimes is who decides, right? Is it the Attorney General decides, or is it the client who decides? And most time it's clear who decides how something's going to proceed, but there are cases where it's not clear, and there sometimes can be disagreements with the client, sometimes high-profile clients, and take my word for it, it can be regardless of party or anything else, right? Just a disagreement on who's making the decision here. And so we try to be always mindful of that, obviously. And then I guess the only thing I would add is that on sort of difficult decisions or high-profile decisions, my view is that, it's important to make those decisions, but also to, I think, in the role of Attorney General, is to articulate, to justify, to speak about the rationale for that decision as clearly as one can, and to anyone who was interested in hearing it, whether they agree with you or disagree with you. I think that's a critical component of it, is to communicate to the public about why this decision was made and what the rationale was and why we're going forward in this direction. And that's something we spend a lot of time internally. How we're going to talk about this case to the public, that's really important, is how we communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because we are doing it in their name if we bring litigation.
Mm-hmm. So as Attorney General, was there anything that surprised you when you became Attorney General about the role, that maybe you thought it was going to be, the job duties coming in as Attorney General, that surprised you the most? Senator Gorton.
Yes. It turned out to be a better job than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, that's good.
And it turned out, just as you've heard the articulation here, it turned out that that it had broader implications, and that there were more things that you could do, that you weren't just the attorney for state agencies and only carrying out their policies and had nothing else. I was pleasantly surprised that it was a broader job than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think there's a significant component of leadership involved. One of the things that I didn't anticipate that I enjoyed the most about the job was just leading a really great group of people and being a servant leader for them. It's just such a fabulous a group of lawyers and professional staff who are there in the office. Secondly, you can't fully anticipate the breadth of the issues that you're going to be addressing in that office, because the office covers such a broad swath of the waterfront, legally speaking. So whether it was dealing with sexual violent predator commitments, or with cases involving the tribes, or any number of cases, it's just breathtaking, and it's fun, because you, as the Attorney General, you can only give your attention to so many cases in depth, and you get to choose which ones you think are most important that you're going to focus on. But the third thing that I didn't appreciate until I had been AG for a little while was a point that Craig Wright helped me really focus on one year, which was to really focus on the theme of everyday work that matters. And we were talking there about the children's cases and the L&I cases, the cases that don't get the headlines, but are enormously important in terms of individual lives. And those cases, as many of you know who've been involved with the office, constitute the bulk of the work, a majority of the work that the office does. Similarly, defending the state against tort claims and other sort of high-volume cases. Those are, they don't grab the headlines, they're not as flashy, but they're enormously important, and they really do represent the everyday work that matters.
I guess what I would say, Erika, is the question is what surprised me. I mean, in some ways, I wouldn't say there's anything that's too much of a surprise, in large part because of the guy sitting next to me. Shortly after I was elected, I got a phone call. And remember, I got a phone call from Rob just a few days after the election. I've known Rob since
we were in college.
Since I was in college, yeah, right. And but I got a phone call from Rob saying, "Hey, congratulations, let's sit down and chat." And he made the transition. To say he put it was smooth would be an understatement. I mean, we sat down in his office. We spoke for hours. I recall, it was a long conversation. all of his staff was available to me and my transition team. My goodness, I mean, there's any question I had that period of time from election day to taking office to, to get up to speed as much as one can that time period. Look, I know of AGs who get elected, they replace someone of a different political party like we are, and the outgoing person says, yeah, you're not going to see anything. You get the keys when you get sworn in at noon on January 10th. That happens. Unthinkable in Washington State, truly, and that's a blessing for us and certainly a blessing for me. So I don't think there wasn't a huge surprise. What I would say is that I underestimated certain things, and maybe the single biggest thing I underestimated is maybe two things: the public focus on the job. I went from a King County Council member like you did, which, okay, you're dealing with the media and public interest, but to go from that to this job where there's a lot of scrutiny was I underestimated, and I think I underestimated. While I'm comfortable in the context of grappling with legal issues, you allude to the wide range of issues that our office has. On any given day, you are veering from one type of law to another, to a third, to a fourth. You're juggling a lot and a lot of different things, and you've got to be able to move really, really quickly from one to the other and keep making decisions to keep the trains rolling. And I think I knew that was going to be a part of it, but until you experience it, it took a little while to get used to that.
And you mentioned the breadth of the issues in the office and, of course, the affirmative litigation that the office does. How do you decide what cases? Is there a specific process in terms of those cases? Of course, many of our cases come through our clients and the work that they bring. But in terms of the cases or the initiatives that the office focuses on, that you as Attorney General focus, was there a process?
Remember, the comparative numbers are very disproportionate. The number of cases you're dealing in a group of ones with the discretionary cases you bring simply because you think they're the right thing to do and the right thing for the state, while the cases where you're representing one of your clients are numbered in the thousands.
Right.
So, and the latter are almost all judged by the most senior person or the structure of the agency's the section of the Attorney General's office itself. The things that you do on your own, sometimes you consult on them because of the impacts they have. Sometimes they are just because you believe that they ought to be done. And you're more likely to consult some of your personal friends if you do anything than you are other people in the office, because you don't want the other people in your office to be involved in the politics.
Mm-hmm. I think this is where having an elected Attorney General is really valuable, because I remember Chris Gregoire and I had a conversation after I was reelected as AG and she was reelected as governor, and we were talking about how we really felt, although it's, of course, campaigning is hard work and there's a lot of sacrifice involved, but we also felt more connected to the voters. We felt reconnected to them in a way we hadn't been since we'd campaigned the first time to get our jobs. And I think that's one of the reasons that, and one of the values in running is that AGs can decide where to put their focus, in part based on what they're hearing from their constituents. So when you're out there talking to people and you're asking them what do you care about, what's affecting you, it can lead to initiatives and a focus on things like methamphetamine labs, on human trafficking, on internet-based fraud. We are, I think, more responsive to the people of the state because we are elected and because we have a lot of contact with them. And not just with them, but with other elected leaders like county prosecutors and public defenders and a lot of other folks who we interact with as well, who we wouldn't see as much or in as much depth if we didn't have to, reapply for our jobs every 4 years.
I'll have to, that reminds me of a story I've got to tell on myself about what you learn from campaigning. The first time that I ran for Attorney General, my most valuable supporter in Eastern Washington was a man named Don Brazier, who was a one-term Republican legislator from Yakima, but just knew people all over the state. And he had accompanied me to the southeast corner, and we'd had a breakfast in Clarkston and had a brief stop, I think, in somewhere in Davenport. And we stopped for an interview at the Waitsburg News. Waitsburg has about 1,100 people, and it had a newspaper. And the newspaper owner and editor was a very staunch Republican, and so it was a wonderful interview. And I felt very good. I felt very good about it afterwards, and we were on our way to Walla Walla. And as we walked out, across the street from the newspaper office were two farmers holding up a wall of a building, chatting with one another. And Brazier said, now, if you're really a candidate, you're going to go across the street and ask those two guys for their vote. Well, I was looking forward to having a good lunch in Walla Walla, and I really didn't want to do it. So I said, we've got to get moving. And he said, no, you're going to go across and talk to those two guys. And this went on for a couple of minutes. It was about the sixth time he told me that I had to go that I did. Well, they were smart enough. They were watching this going on across the street. So I go across the street, and I put out my hand, and I said, hi, I'm Slade Gorton. I'm running for Attorney General, and I appreciate your vote. One of them pulls the straw out of his teeth and says, what's your position on the price of wheat? Now, that is beyond the jurisdiction of the Attorney General.
So I won't add too much on that, Erika. One thing I did want to just mention, though, was in talking about transitions and being ready, I should want to mention that Chris Gregoire, who unfortunately wanted to be here but has a family commitment today, she also reached out right after the election. And I'll just tell a small story is my daughter was 5 at the time, and 4 or 5 at the time. And so Chris Gregoire was governor still. She was on her way out, but was still governor. So I had an early morning meeting down at the governor's mansion, governor's office with her. So I was tucking my daughter into bed the night before, and I was telling Katie I wasn't going to be there in the next morning because Daddy had a meeting. She said, where are you going? And she's just a little kid. And I said, well, I'm going down to Olympia. She said, who are you meeting with? And I said, the governor. She said, what's the governor? And I said, well, how do you explain it to a 5-year-old? I said, well, it's the most important job in the state. The governor runs the state. And Katie thought about that for a minute. And she said, is the governor a girl? And it was a great moment to be able to tell her, yes, the governor was a girl. And I could tell, at that point, I learned a valuable lesson, right? At that age, kids are already thinking, right, about that. And so Katie, I'm proud to say, has a great relationship with Chris Gregoire, Maria Campbell, and Senator Murray. She's on a first-name basis with all of them, yeah. But I think it is that the former AGs, I've met with all the former AGs, regularly. I mean, it really is helpful for a new AG coming in to be able to draw on folks who've been through some of these issues that come back over and over, maybe in different forms, but they're still there.
Now, all three of you have or are serving multiple terms as Attorney General. What kept you motivated as Attorney General?
The fact that every day brought a different question. Every day, you did not know when you went into the office everything you were going to deal with that day, even though you had a schedule. It was already printed out. For sure. And it keeps you alive and keeps you thinking. And you have to divide your hours and your times as you see fit, but you have that whole group of assistants. Once that you've made a decision that relates to the representation process, who are going to carry out those views and help you with it. And you've got to be a good delegator. You absolutely have to know what to delegate and what not to delegate.
Yeah, let me pick up on that thread. I think that one of my sources of motivation was just the people I worked with and feeling like I owed them a great obligation to do the best job I could every day. And that's, in part, that's because, AGs are only going to be there for a set period of time. I don't know, it's pretty remarkable. We've had a number of AGs who've served 12 years. I was the first AG, except for Eastfold in the 50s, who didn't serve 3 terms. And yet, for all of that, you have a remarkable number of people in the Attorney General's office who spend their entire careers as legal professionals in that office. And I always felt that I owed it to them as well. And I also find it very motivating to get to work with really, really terrific people. And they'll teach you a lot. I had one Deputy Attorney General who was convinced when I came into office that I was going to fire him because we were of different political parties, so of course I would fire him. And he's marched into my office and handed me a sheet of paper with a list of 15 ideas for improving the office, figuring, what the hell, I'm leaving anyway, I might as well tell you what I really think. And of course, I had no intention of not keeping him. He was a terrific, terrific Deputy Attorney General, and we remain good friends to this day. But he had a number of valuable insights and ideas that we implemented, and he wasn't by any means alone. There were many people in the office who, once they realized they were empowered to do so, came forward and brought their best thinking. My favorite story along those lines concerned one of our file clerks. Becky worked in the Solicitor General Division, and we had one of our town hall meetings called Speak Ups. And at one of the Speak Ups, we were focused on how to save money because it was one of those dire budget years, and we were dealing with very difficult, of many, right? It was one of those dire budget years. So during the town hall, the Speak Up, Becky got up and she said, I know how we can save money on file folders. This is a subject about which she knew a great deal because she handled hundreds of manila folders every day. And so we noted her idea, and I believe we implemented it. But for weeks afterwards, she would stop by my office on the 7th floor, poke her head and say, Rob, how are we doing on that file folder project? So I knew that when she stood up and felt confident enough and safe enough to speak her mind and share her expertise, we had gotten someplace. And it just reinforced that commitment that I had to the office.
That's great. And did you finish the file folder
Right,
project?
I know we did. I'm going to say we did. I dare you to contradict me.
I just build on that a little bit. It's a great job. I mean, to say I love the job would be a dramatic understatement. It's a great job, and in large part, I think to your point, Rob, is you get to work with such wonderful people. I mean, committed to public service and using the law as a tool for good, right, and to serve the people in public service, right. It's we think we have the best Office Attorney General anywhere in the country. I believe that to be true. Our office is respected that way. My 5 predecessors, going back to John O'Connell, and through Rob, all 5 of them were selected by their colleagues as the president of the National Association of AGs, 5 in a row. No other state has more than 3 AGs who have ever served in that role. Washington has 5. No other state's particularly close. No pressure on me, by the way, guys. Thanks. Yeah.
We weren't going to say anything, Bob.
I haven't got there yet, but I think it is indicative of the strength of our office, that independence, regardless of party, regardless of any of those things. And I think, moreover, is having served like Rob did and like the senator did in a legislative position. I enjoyed that experience on the King County Council, but to have an executive role. I like that. You can drive things, you can move things, and there's a lot of dysfunction well documented in Congress or even the state legislature at times, right, where there can be dysfunction. You have to do a lot to get one thing through, even at the county council. You're the Attorney General. The law is a powerful tool. I talk about that all the time. And when you have you are working with the best public law office in the country, it's hard not to love a job like that. And so, no, I never have there's not an hour of any day where I'm not intensely focus and interest in the work that's going on. Not an hour of a day. That's a fact. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think that's a great place to pause for a moment because it's rare that we have the opportunity to have all 3 attorney generals here, and I want to give an opportunity to the audience if there are questions out there. Yes.
So a significant portion of my practice focuses on admin appeals, and by virtue of that, your office and our former office is often on the other side. And my question, and this was touched on a little bit, but at the end of the day, you have a duty to be a zealous advocate for your client under the RPCs. But my question is, I've often dealt with agencies, in particular the Department of Revenue, where you have a party who is unilaterally, and in our opinion, obviously, improperly interpreting a portion of the RCW or the WAC. And, I'm curious kind of what that conversation is like behind the scenes with your client when maybe they're taking a position that is completely unreasonable.
So let me just repeat that question for the camera, and it's talking about sort of what it looks like behind the scenes when a client is taking a position that we may, maybe the law isn't on their side, or maybe there's different interpretations of it.
Well, theoretically, and as you look at an organizational chart, the Assistant Attorney General for a given department is to provide legal advice to that department. But a good Attorney General is going to go beyond that. And if he or she sees something that is not working right, or he sees an injustice, that Assistant Attorney General is going to attempt to put it right. That's what we want them to do. That's what they do when, when they're really good. And as a matter of fact, many agency heads come to depend more on their chief assistant attorney general than they do on almost anyone else in their office. Not just to tell them what the law is, but to tell them what the right thing to do is.
You know, one thing to remember is that with an agency that has administrative authority like revenue or any number of other agencies, the issue is not necessarily elevated to the Attorney General's office initially. They have lawyers on staff, as you know, people with law degrees, and they will issue interpretations and make rulings without consulting the office. The Assistant Attorney General will sometimes be involved, but many times will not, and then will become involved if the issue goes to court, because once it goes to Superior Court, again, as you know, it is outside of the ALJ realm, then yeah, we're definitely involved, and that can lead to all kinds of interesting results like the one I described earlier involving the Commissioner of Public Lands. We had this concept that has been around the office a long time that I learned when I became AG called option-based legal advice. So, you know, we dealt with this in our internal CLEs, and we talked about it quite a bit because we take seriously the notion that we don't represent individuals and agencies, and we don't just look at the individual agency either. We think about the state. And so we want to give the right advice because of that strong public interest that we were representing, and we'd never want to counsel a position that isn't supported. We wanted to be the gold standard in the practice of law, which meant honoring the rule of law. So I think that we achieved that, but it is certainly you can end up in disagreements, and often there's a lot of gray area, right? That's what lawyers specialize in, is those areas where the answer isn't crystal clear, and we would advise the client that, look, we think this is the best answer. Here's another answer which is defensible that may have the following consequences, and ultimately you are working with clients, and so you want to recognize they have some certain prerogatives as well. You're not just telling them what to do. But I think that all of us could, if we could divulge confidences, which we wouldn't, could probably share examples with you of places where we told the client they were wrong, don't do it, and they didn't.
Rob gave exactly the answer I was going to give. To be honest, the only thing I was going to actually add at the end is I've been in rooms with clients saying, I don't think you should do X. They said, we want to do X. We don't think that's frivolous. We think there's arguments. I mean, so as long as we can, in good faith, consistent with the rules of professional conduct, do what the client's directing, that's a big part of our practice. Like I said, there have been times, I suspect the same for Rob and Slade, where I myself have communicated that to a client on what I consider really big issues, obviously, but they're the clients. And as long as we think they have arguments to make, and they're good faith arguments, that is our job for those clients.
Another question.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting now. I'd say in most cases, any one of you is probably the smartest person in the room. But when you're in the room and you're trying to make a decision, how do you make a decision that you've had enough, or how do you decide when you need to rely on others and give up on it? Where do you make that decision? I'm just going to go the way I feel, sort of maybe in the face of some advice.
Oh, in other words, contrary to the advice from the team, in other words?
Yeah.
In other words,
How are you satisfied that you've done enough thinking, that you're not just in your own echo chamber saying, I've got this figured out? How do you check yourself?
man.
Well, one way you do that is you let everyone you're working with know that you're not just waiting for them to agree with what you already decided, and to encourage and really even require a spirited discussion and debate around the tough issues in the group, whether it's a group of lawyers in a particular division or it's the deputy attorneys general and the solicitor general. I think it's important as a leader to empower the folks who are your closest advisors and most senior advisors to know they can disagree with you and they can disagree with each other, and that's all fine. And even if I'm espousing a particular view, I might just be trial ballooning it. I'm willing to be contradicted and I want to hear it. So the best way to get to the right decision, in my view, is to have that discussion and that debate so you're airing all sides. I mean, there have been famous executives, famous presidents who have actually assigned responsibilities. You're going to be the blue team, you're going to be the red team. Come give me the best arguments on both sides of the issue. That ought to be what happens. Now, given the volume of decision making, it can't always happen, and so you fall back on your instincts. But I would always think twice about taking a position that a number of my top people disagreed with.
I think that you have got to know something that we haven't quite covered here, and that is you can't debate forever. And that every decision you make as an individual, as an official, or as a human being, almost every important decision you make is based on inadequate knowledge. You don't know everything. You can't know everything. You can't hear every argument. So Rob just said it. You listen to all sides of it, and then you decide. Not deciding is the decision itself and is always the wrong one.
I think what I would echo, you do not have unlimited time, right? You do not have unlimited time. Ask as many questions as you can within the time frame you have. To Rob's point, having folks who are willing to say on your team, hey, Bob, that's a mistake. And as we mentioned upstairs with the students, just yesterday, there's a client, we have a disagreement. I was angry yesterday. I wrote up a response. I was ready to press send on that thing. And a member of my team said, no, you can't send that. I mean, he said, no, you can't. He said, you're mad. He said, you're angry. You can't send that. And, I've learned to trust this person's judgment, right? I disagreed with him at the time. I did. But I listened to him, and a couple hours later when I cooled down, I was like, thank God I did not send that. Truly, thank God. I mean, thank God. And so, but you need people who will say, Bob, you can't do that. I'm telling you, you can't do it, right? And so that's key. One thing I'll just add is at some point, if the decision's on their desks or my desk now, they're the tough ones, obviously, right? Otherwise, somebody else has made it. And at some point, I came to the conclusion that you have to get as much as you can. Time is limited. You ask as many questions as you can, but I try to just trust my instincts. That's, I don't know another way to put it. On some level, we are who we are. We got where we are. Whatever combination of life experiences got us here, and I just think I try to just trust my instincts. And if a member of my team who I trust says, wait a second on those instincts, I'm going to revisit that, okay, and think carefully about it. But for me, I think in a nutshell, that's how it goes.
Well, we are about at the end of our time, but I do have one more question, and that is for Senator Gorton. As everyone knows, we are here to honor the 50th year since your election to Attorney General, but also to celebrate your 90th birthday. And so I wonder, do you have a special birthday wish for your 90th birthday?
Get to 91.
Fair enough.
Now, before we wrap up, Senator, we have one last item. It is the Senator just celebrated a 90th birthday, and Senator, we did decide to get you a small token of appreciation. It is a cake that will serve everybody here, and as you will see, it is in the form of. You can see I'm wearing his campaign button from 1968 for Attorney General. It's in the form of his campaign button from 1968 for Attorney General.
Brilliant.
So I think
Thank you.
it's appropriate now that we do need to sing him happy birthday. And I know I shouldn't lead that. Well, Rob, you got the karaoke. Maybe Rob should lead us and get us going for Senator Gorton. We'll sing happy birthday, Rob.
I assume you all won't need a little bouncing ball. All right. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Slade. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to, if I may, Slade, I want to thank Bob and Erika and everyone at the Attorney General's office for putting this together, and it takes a lot of work. It's been in the planning stages for a long time, and it's a brilliant idea. It's been a lot of fun, so thank you. And Bob, thank you also for your particular interest in the history of the office and in its legacy. You've just done a marvelous job of reminding us all about why this is such an important place to work. And I say that recognizing there are many people in this room who have worked or are working in the Attorney General's office today. So thank you, Bob, very, very much.
People have worked for Slade and Rob and me, right? So there are folks who have a lot of continuity there in that office.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Senator. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.